Once upon a time, in a small village nestled among gently rolling picturesque hills, there lived a boy who carried a silent pain within him. Unlike other children his age, his legs were disabled, making every step unsteady and extremely difficult. He relied entirely on a wooden cane to keep his frail body balanced. Though he bore a significant physical impairment, fate had quietly compensated him with extraordinarily gifted hands. He could mold clay or carve scraps of wood into vivid works of art, each piece filled with emotions and depth that he could never express in words. However, instead of being appreciated, that talent was buried in complete loneliness. He spent most of his time alone by the porch, silently observing the world through his careful fingers. He could not join the lively games of running soccer or chasing that the village children enjoyed. That physical difference unintentionally made him the target of cruel jokes from his peers. The village children, instead of showing sympathy or offering friendship, often mocked him mercilessly. "Look, the cripple is trying to walk with 3 legs," they shouted and laughed gleefully whenever they saw him struggling along the rough village paths. Even more cruelly, they deliberately placed large stones or branches across his way. When he tripped and his cane flew out of reach, they had no intention of helping him. They simply stood watching before running away, leaving him scrambling in the dust with deep humiliation. Their taunts were like sharp thorns, piercing his heart, causing his soul to bleed in silence. Every night, he lay awake in the darkness, staring at the roof and asking himself, in overwhelming despair, why was I born like this? What is the purpose of my life, if my existence only brings burden and ridicule to others? He felt like a mistake of creation, an unnecessary presence in the perfect world of others. He longed to run swiftly on healthy legs, but harsh reality always dragged him back to the bitter truth. One morning, when the weight of sorrow became too heavy to bear, the boy decided he could not endure this life for another second. He took his cane and, step by difficult step, made his way toward the rushing river at the edge of the village. In his mind there was only one thought: this river will end all the pain and humiliation I have suffered. His heart was heavy with despair as he stood on the brink of the end. The rushing sound of the river grew clearer before his eyes, but the boy's limping steps suddenly halted when he heard a gentle rustling from the canopy of an ancient banyan tree. Beneath the vast shade of the great tree, a monk was sitting in meditation, his saffron robe glowing under the morning sunlight. The monk opened his eyes, sensing the gloom within the boy's soul, and gently called out, "My child, I see a storm raging inside your heart. Come here and sit beside me." The boy was startled. Such kindness in a voice was something he had not received for a long time. Slowly he approached his cane, trembling in his gifted hands, now damp with sweat from fear. All his resentment poured out like a broken dam. He spoke of his disabled legs that made him a burden, of his hands that could only carve lifeless objects, yet could not help him run like the other children, and of the cruel mockery from the village boys. He sobbed, "I am useless, master. This disability makes me a stain, not a blessing." The monk listened with compassion and began to tell a story. In a dense forest, there were tall, straight, and proud trees. Beside them stood a tree with a twisted trunk and tangled branches. Every day the straight trees mocked their neighbor, calling it useless and a disgrace to the forest. The crooked tree lived in deep sorrow, longing to be as perfect as its companions. Then one day woodcutters arrived. They ordered all the straight trees to be cut down for beams, but they ignored the crooked tree because its wood was too twisted and could not create any practical value for them. The crooked tree stood alone, saved by the very thing it had once considered its greatest flaw. From that day on, it became a peaceful home for hundreds of birds. Pausing for a moment to let the story sink into the boy's mind, the monk continued, "Do you see yourself in that crooked tree? Those who mock you only see the surface. Their eyes may be bright, but they are blind to the compassion and beauty within your hands. Your disabled legs force you into stillness, and it is that very stillness that has nurtured in you a soul deeper than anyone else's. Imperfection is not weakness. It is the source of a unique strength that you must learn to cherish." The monk's story was like the first ray of sunlight tearing through the long dark night in the boy's mind. He looked down at his disabled legs, then at his trembling hands, and asked with doubt, "Master, the crooked tree was saved, because it was useless to the woodcutters. But how can these disabled legs become a strength? The monk smiled, his eyes filled with compassion. "Tell me," he said, "when your hands touch wood and stone to create your works, what do you see?" The boy pondered for a long time before answering, "I do not see the rough grains of the wood. I see emotions, lessons, and truths hidden beneath their outer appearance, master." "Exactly," the monk exclaimed. "Those children out there have strong legs to run and jump, but their souls are blind to compassion, wisdom, and the beauty within your gift. They only see the surface. You, because of the forced stillness brought by your legs, have learned to see with your heart. The very flaw you once considered a stain has granted you a unique vision, turning you into a craftsman capable of touching the soul of all things." The monk placed his hand on the boy's shoulder and carefully advised him, "Never compare yourself to others, for that only leads to suffering. Each person has a separate path and purpose. The crooked tree survived to become a home for hundreds of birds, and you, with your gifted hands and your experience of pain, will create things that ordinary people could never accomplish." The boy felt a new strength shifting within him. He realized that difference was not a weakness, but the source of invaluable power. The monk advised him to return and continue creating. "Let your talent shine even brighter. Those who possess wisdom will naturally be drawn to you. As for the bullies, life itself would teach them the lessons they deserved, just as the straight trees were ultimately cut down because of their own perfection." The boy stood up, gripping his cane tightly with a faith he had never known before. The boy returned to the village with a completely new mindset. He no longer blamed fate or lowered his head silently before the mockery of his peers. Instead of hiding in the shadows, he chose to sit beneath the tree at the entrance of the village, where people often passed by. His gifted hands began working tirelessly with twisted, rough pieces of wood, the kind the woodcutters had discarded as useless and incapable of creating value. He carefully carved, transforming scars and crooked shapes in the wood into mesmerizing artistic lines that carried stories of resilience within them. When the village faced difficulties in daily life, it was the boy's hands that became an unexpected source of salvation. The stillness and keen observation gifts gained from having to remain seated because of his disabled legs allowed him to see solutions that the perfect yet hurried people often overlooked. He created unique tools from materials that had been despised, proving that every circumstance or trait carries its own advantages if one looks deeply into its true nature. The children who once bullied him gradually gathered around, but this time not to mock him but to watch in amazement. They saw his hands move as if by magic, turning imperfection into priceless objects. The boy held no resentment. Instead, he used empathy to share the value of uniqueness, helping the villagers understand that flaws are in truth, protection, and the source of strength. He gradually became the most respected teacher in the village, a living testament that what makes us different is precisely what makes us invaluable and irreplaceable. As time passed, the once disabled boy became a distinguished artisan and the most respected teacher in the village. He no longer resented fate or saw himself as a burden, for he understood that his unsteady legs had trained him in stillness, enabling him to perceive truths hidden beneath the surface that others easily overlooked. The children who had once bullied him had now grown up, carrying within them both regret and sincere admiration for the artisan whose hands seemed almost magical. Whenever someone felt despair because of their own imperfections, they would come to his workshop. There he would always tell them the story of the crooked tree, the tree that survived and became a home for hundreds of birds precisely because it was considered useless in the eyes of the woodcutters. He taught them that no one in this world is perfect, and that perfection is merely an illusion that blinds the arrogant. Those with strong legs are sometimes blind to compassion and the beauty of difference. The greatest lesson he passed on was to stop comparing oneself to others, because each person has a unique path and purpose. You are not useless because you are different. You are invaluable because you are unique, he would often say to those who felt lost. His story rescued countless souls standing at the riverbank of despair, just as the monk's teaching had once changed his life. The village now radiated compassion, where people understood that imperfections are the true source of strength and irreplaceable beauty.